Welcome to The Alignment Show, featuring conversations with folks who have taken steps to identify their highest values and align their lives around them. Time on this earth is not unlimited, and you may be seeking to make sure you spend your time on things that matter to you. These conversations will encourage you and support you in doing so. Now, let's meet this week's guest on The Alignment Show. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Sounds like that just kind of cut off the the intro music. Never know what's going to happen with these electronics things. In any case, glad that you are back with us again here on the Alignment Show. My name is Don King, and I will be your host today, as is usually the case. So we have an encore performance today. We have had Lizbeth Meredith on our show before. Got some updates with her and some additional insights. And so thought it was a good idea to have her back. Before we get into that, I just want to remind you that our show is sponsored by a couple of good people, one of them being myself, in a way. We'll talk about my books a bit. I'm not going to spend much time on it, but I would encourage you to go check out donking.com. That's DONN.com/books. Well, I do have several of them out there. I'm going to put the little crawl up here to make that easy. Mostly what I write is business parables, but there's at least 3 other books that are in process right now on various topics. One of them is aimed at helping people who find themselves after having been successful in a creative career, writing, editing, broadcasting, painting, theater, whatever it might be. Already had some success, and now you find yourself as a caregiver. How do you keep creating under those circumstances? So I think you'll want to stay in touch with that. There's also the Sparklight Chronicles, a series of business parables. If that sounds dry to you, they're not. They're using fiction to teach nonfiction principles. And so I think they're good stories in and of themselves. At least that's the feedback that we've had from readers. And so I want to make sure that you know about that. Also, to check out SalesWise Live, frequent sponsor of ours. This is Bob Berg, Kim Angeli, and Jeff West, all of whom follow a philosophy of sales that is built on genuine relationships and friendships, not pushy. If you think of sales as something that makes you feel just a little bit dirty, it is not. The word sales actually is based linguistically in a root word that means to serve. That is their orientation. And so they have a training program that is designed to help you to do that. It not only makes you feel better about your work, it actually makes it far more effective. And so check out SalesWise Live. You can get there by going to donking.com. That's DONNKING.com/SalesWise. A little reminder that you can always find the show notes by going to confidencecultivators.com for this episode or any previous episode. I would encourage you to share this with a friend. There's somebody that you know that needs this encouragement. Here on the Alignment Show, we're always looking at how people can live their values in order to value their lives. And I'll bet somebody will come to mind as you are listening to this episode today. Subscribe to make sure that you don't miss an episode. And then we always send out, or I have to say most of the time, we send out what's coming up with our guests. And so you can plan around that. In any case, what we have on tap today is Lizbeth Meredith, as I've already mentioned. Lizbeth is quite impressive. She's a multi-award winning author, professional speaker, a college instructor. And she's a rare guest whose book has inspired a movie, in this case, a TV movie entitled Stolen by Their Father. Now, she's written 3 books and has others on the way. She's been published in major magazines. I grew up in Alaska, and it's a small world. I found out when we first started talking with her that she actually lives only about an hour and a half drive from me here in East Tennessee. So I'm looking forward to us actually connecting in person at some point. But in any case, we want to go ahead and get to the interview today without messing about anymore. Let's go ahead and bring on the talk and the conversation. And we would encourage you, by the way, another little side trip here. Make comments. Perfectly good to make comments, even if it's on a replay. We do see them, and we'll follow up with them. So here we are with Lizbeth Meredith. And so we're very glad to have back with us again Lizbeth Meredith. It wasn't too long ago that we finally broadcast the episode. Lizbeth, you and I recorded back in July. But even in that episode, at the time, you were looking toward publishing Tilka Faces the Odds. And in fact, one of the things I really enjoyed about that episode was you talking about that phrase, the odds are good, but the goods are odd.
Yes.
And so it was almost good timing, because you have published the book now, but you're still in a way working on getting that out to the world, because your audio book is about ready to come out now. Am I correct on that?
So correct. And I thank you so much for having me back to talk about that. I, this time, went to a studio when I recorded the audiobook. There's a studio here in Chattanooga where I live now, and it's called Wavelength Studio. And it was so helpful to have somebody who could help sort of edit or let me know where editing needed to happen as we went on. And so just booking it 1 week at a time sessions, it made it easier to pay for. It was very affordable and so much more fun than doing this alone. So I'm really grateful that now we're in the final edits, and in February it shall be so.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I know it's almost like publishing the book for the first time in terms of that excitement and the feeling of it.
Yes.
So what made you decide, and again, reminder for listeners, reminder for us, we're not primarily a show about writers, but we are looking at how people make decisions, how they take steps to bring their lives into alignment with their values. And so there's something useful there for us to dig into the process a little bit, because getting an audiobook made is not easy. I mean, it's easier than it was, let's say, 10 years ago.
Right.
10 years ago, it was hard just to get a book independently published.
Right.
So that's a process in and of itself. Audiobook's been around for a while. Our public library in Blount County, Tennessee, has an amazing collection of audiobooks on CD. That's not how they do them anymore.
Right.
And so just for folks who are thinking about, okay, I listen to audiobooks, come to think of it, I'm not sure how they get made. It's a lot more trouble and a lot more expense than getting the main book published. Would
Correct.
you agree with that?
Oh, so much agree with that. And it's exhausting. I mean, I really enjoy being in a studio because I am sensitive to too much light and too much noise that the world offers, ping, 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 traffic sounds, all of that. So when I'm in a studio, I feel very soothed, but it's tiring to bring that energy into reading. You would think, oh, it's just reading a book, but it's really not. And sometimes as an author, you find out that there are places you missed, that there are typos, or that you would have written it differently had you realized that you were going to be recording it in an audiobook. And that was very humbling at times.
Well, and I can imagine. I know I hear from writers all the time, and I'm in the process of making an audiobook out of the Sparklight Chronicles, Way of the 3-Year-Old Why, and all that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm seeing, anytime you go through your book, you see more typos or whatever.
Yes.
Although I have to say, among independently published books these days, I tend to see fewer typos than I see among even the big five. Nobody pays editors like they used to.
Right. That is the truth. I think we make a lot of assumptions as writers that if I go through one of the big five, that it's definitely going to come out perfect. It's going to come out better. It's going to be, but not necessarily. So regardless, it's something to watch for as we write our books, is rely on a team of people that can help you. That can be expensive,
Oh
but
yeah.
there are tools and things that help do the early edits. So that's good.
Yep, yep. And let's go ahead and show for folks who are on here via video. This is the book, and if you follow that QR code, which those of you who are on here audio only, we will have the link in the show notes. So you're going to want to be sure that you remember confidencecultivators.com. I always emphasize that S just to make sure people get there. Remember confidencecultivators.com, because you will be able to then follow the link to the book wherever it's published, and that will lead you to the audio book once it's there. Okay, so Tilka Faces the Odds. Tilka is spelled Tilka, and you can find it that way. And so one of the things I want to dig into is we think about that decision-making process. Arguably, there are at least 3 different subcategories of audiobooks these days. This is still a developing area of publishing. I was listening to the Writers Inc. podcast last week, and they reported a news item in publishing that for the first time, now, I'm going by memory, so this could be inaccurate, but I'm almost sure I heard them say that for the first time, the sales of audiobooks had surpassed the sales of print books last year.
Wow, that's amazing.
I think. And it's a hugely growing category. And because it is growing, then it's beginning to segment. And the segments that I'm hearing about, I'm trying to remember what they call them here. Let's see, there are the AI voices, which is a growing trend. And a lot of authors are going with that because although it's less than ideal, there are a lot of, and I'm going to say readers in quotation marks, there are a lot of readers who don't really care about the quality of the voice. The AI voices are getting pretty good, but still, you can tell they're not quite as warm, and they're just going for convenience and a lower expense.
Amen. Yes,
Okay.
much less expensive.
As a reader, it costs you less to buy an audiobook made with an AI voice. There's the category of audiobooks read by the reader. And these tend not to be as professional quality in terms of the voice,
Right.
but people like hearing the person who wrote the book reading the book. And so that tends to be a middle tier in terms of expense for the reader, but the attraction is that the author read it. And then I think the term was immersive audiobook. And these basically are what, and Lizbeth, you and I are kind of in the same generation. It's what we might have used to have thought of as readers' theater or radio plays. They'll have for the dialogue for the female protagonist, they'll have a woman's voice. For the male, they have a man's voice. You have a dozen different characters. They try to make them sound different. There's a narrator. These are professionally produced, and they're expensive books. They're expensive to produce. And what we're seeing is that these 3 categories, in a lot of ways, don't overlap. People who go for the inexpensive book, they always go for the inexpensive book. People who want the radio play always go for the radio play. So that's a big setup in order to ask. I can already tell you did the as read by author.
Yes.
So how did you decide on that category rather than using AI voice or going to, part of it I'm sure was expense, but you could get a grant or whatever. So how not to go for that upper tier? Does that make sense?
Yes. I loved my first book came out with a small indie publisher, and it didn't have an audiobook version attached to it initially. And I was so fortunate that I had
Is this it on the screen? Pieces of Me? Was that your
yes.
first? Okay.
And now it does have an audiobook, and she did a brilliant job one of the amazing voice actors who makes a living doing so. So she liked my book, reached out to me, lived in Alaska, and she was already very, very, very talented. And she sold the idea to the company she worked for, Vibrance Press. They did a brilliant version of it. I couldn't, as a newbie. It's much harder than it seems to create an audiobook. And there, in that book, there were accents to be had, different genders, lots of characters. She was amazing. So I knew that was never going to be my thing. The second time I did an audiobook, I tried at home. I am telling you, I think I probably spent easily 60 hours on it. Took several months. I am not especially at that time, I had different editing equipment, was standing in a closet recording because you get a buffered sound. And I had moved to the South from Alaska. So I was sweating bullets and trying to make an audiobook. And you know what? I finished. So I'm very proud of myself. But this time it was perfect to say, I still want to narrate my stuff. There may come a day where I try to use AI. Who knows? But this was important to me to get the studio, very affordable studio, and do it bite by bite, chapter by chapter, paying for it as I went because, it costs a lot to create books. It just does. It costs authors typically much more than they ever make on them.
Yeah.
So I liked this book. It was fun to write. I have written about very serious topics. To write about something that was fun, that still was in the theme of resilience, that, there were funny stories, and it isn't not for everyone. It's certainly not a sequel to my first book, Pieces of Me, Rescuing My Kidnapped Daughters. So it's not, and it's PG-13. I mean, I don't want to suggest this is great for small children, but it was largely about female friendships, creating joy as a single person, even touches on solo travel, which my next couple of books will be on solo travel as a method for healing and resilience. And those will be nonfiction. So all of the things just fit. And I wanted to be a part of something joyful instead of a part of always something tragic and sad.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to understand that. For folks who are listening, let's get all of them kind of in context, the ones that are already published. So I'm going to show once again the QR code for Pieces of Me. And for folks who didn't hear the last episode, aren't familiar with your backstory, nonfiction book, very serious topic. Your daughters, two daughters, were kidnapped by a non-custodial parent and taken out of country.
Correct.
And so that was quite a saga. And this was the first published book. And folks will link to the previous episode so you can get that background if you haven't heard of this yet. But Pieces of Me, Rescuing My Kidnapped Daughters. And then part of the theme there, and this is a theme that runs through all of the books so far, and I'm assuming will probably run through the books that you have in the pipeline. The theme of resilience. We'll talk about your podcast here in just a moment, but you work with people on resilience. And so the second book was Grounded in Grit. This is the one that you did the audiobook yourself in the closet, right?
Yes. Sweating.
And if you don't know, folks, as odd as that sounds, really a closet is an ideal place in terms of the sound.
Right.
If you're low budget like I am, that's a great place to be doing the recording because you don't get the echo. Those of you who are listening on video, we've got a little bit of an echo sound, right now. When I clean it up for audio, one of the things that I do is to have to reduce the echo. You don't even notice it until somebody points it out, which I probably shouldn't have done just now. But anyway, so Grounded in Grit, turn your challenges into superpowers. There's still the theme of resilience, but this is more of a, I don't want to say therapy because, you're not a licensed therapist. Right. And, we always want to be clear about that. But this is a self-help book and one that makes a big difference to readers. And then there is Tilka Faces the Odds. And as we've already said, this comes out of that saying that in Alaska, there are a lot more men than there are women. And so the saying is for women, the odds are good, but the goods are odd. Okay.
Yes.
And so this is fiction. It is lighthearted. It is based in reality, but this is not autobiographical. This is
Right.
just
Right.
okay. Yeah.
Now,
Uh,
there is a moment, it did begin with a very real conversation with my daughters. And there are parts that are it's like a younger version of myself, some of the main character. But the part that was very real was as I was turning 40, my daughters were really worried because they were almost grown and started hanging out with me a little more than they should have. And I didn't even notice that because they were worried that they were going to leave the house and I would be alone and lonely. And as they added, pathetic. So, yeah, they were
thanks, kids.
making sure that I was aware that I was just on the brink of spinsterhood when I was turning 40, and they'd be out the door and they didn't want to worry about me. So they strongly encouraged that I meet someone and that I go through everything possible to meet the man of my dreams quickly, because as my oldest would say, the last of my cute years were approaching. So super helpful advice. And I took it very seriously. The other parts, I definitely wrote in parts of my real job. I worked for 2 decades as a juvenile probation officer. And I
Mm,
always wanted to write about, in fact, I did in the second book as well. I wrote about, of course, protecting people's scenarios, no real names, anything like that. But
mhm.
it's a pretty interesting field, very interesting field. And so I made sure that I kept that the same as well, that Tilka would be an Alaskan woman, a middle-aged woman with snarky daughters, uh, walking off the cliff of old age at 39 to 40, quote unquote. And of course, I'm kidding. And, that she was a juvenile probation officer. That was important to me. But there was nothing that was, there were relationships, whatever, but they weren't taken as the full relationship. There were vignettes, things mixed up, things made up. So it was important to make something that really celebrated resilience and expectation for women. And the fact that we could choose if we wanted to, even though people do it all the time now, but we could choose to date if we wanted to, even if no one asked us. There were ways around that, it turns out, which, I'll be darned. And there were funny experiences. And sometimes in all of life, what we get when we have a goal, it's not the goal that's important, it's the journey
Yes.
and how we change and grow in the process. And so that was definitely an effort that I wanted to share, is that, sometimes things don't turn out quite the way we wish, but we still have transformation that's worthwhile.
Oh, indeed, indeed. And when you're a writer, it's a different twist on that old saying about it's never too late to have a happy life.
Right.
You can recast some of the stuff that happened to you.
Yes.
I relate to this. The Way of the 3-Year-Old Why has a lot of autobiographical material in it for me, but it's not autobiography. It's
Right.
inspired by life. Same thing for the second book, the name of which is escaping me right now. There it is, Medium Well.
Right.
That one the setting is inspired by a real children's hospital where my daughter has spent a lot of time.
Wow.
So you can take those life experiences and through writing about them, fictionalizing them, changing things around, it's almost a kind of therapy for the writer. But you're not having to pay anybody for it. In fact, you're getting paid in a sense.
Right. Right. There is a phrase, and I even bring this up in Tilka Faces the Odds, but nothing bad happens to a writer. And of course, that's not true. A lot of bad things happen to all of us in life, but meaning we don't have to waste it.
Yeah.
It could become the worst of scenarios, could become something beautiful later, or something funny, or something that maybe we never publish, but that we can write about. So
yeah, I can use this.
yes.
One of the things I've told my students for years, if you're a writer or a speaker, no matter what happens to you, it's fodder.
Right.
So, in
Win.
fact,
You win.
I don't have it on today. I may have had it on when we did our first recording. It's a T-shirt my wife bought me. And it says something like, I'm a writer. Anything you say or do could be used in a story."
I
So it's a
love that.
warning to other people.
I love it. And I bet people get naturally quieter around you when you wear it.
It can happen. Yes, yes. So in any case, so as this book, as we're recording this, it is about the middle of January 2025. The audiobook will be coming out in February.
Yes.
I let's go ahead and mention the podcast, by the way, before I forget it. And I just realized I don't have a QR code for that. We will get it in the show notes, folks. But tell us a little bit about the podcast and how that has fit in with the publishing and the speaking, whatever else it is that you do.
Persistence U, and thank you for mentioning that. Persistence U with Lizbeth, and it's U as in university, so it's the letter U. I started during the pandemic, but I really did want to focus on other people's stories. I think when you write a memoir, especially, you can get really sick of yourself. There are a lot of people who've led extraordinary lives and they've been through very difficult things or amazing things or whatever. And I really wanted to celebrate persistence and resilience. And so this is a guested podcast typically. I've had some people complain that I don't share enough about my life in it. And maybe, maybe I'll do a mini series where I do, but it's wonderful to have guests from around the globe who share their stories. And I was so honored to have you on Persistence U with Lizbeth to talk about, yes, here's what life has dished, but here's what I'm doing with it.
Mhm.
And it can be a beautiful thing. I think a lot of times when we are isolated, like during the pandemic, we can often feel like we're the only ones living sometimes in quiet desperation. And the fact of the matter is, no, life has a lot of that to dish for us all. And it isn't always a happily ever after. And I think on Persistence U and in my books, even whether they're fiction or nonfiction, I do want people to understand I've never had a happily ever after, but a happily enough ever after, I can get behind that.
There
I
we
can
go.
get behind that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Not so much through the alignment show, although there certainly are flavors of that. The people we talk with usually have come through some kind of life-changing crisis.
Sure.
But in the other work that I have done, we mentioned from time to time, I pastor a church also. It used to strike me people would use pastors as cheap therapists, because we don't charge
Right.
$200 an hour. And there'd be somebody that'd be in my office that if you saw them on the street, they're, always happy telling a joke and all. And they've gone through something that you listen to it, you think, how is it you're not curled up on the floor in a fetal position? And then they leave and somebody else comes in. They leave and somebody else comes in. And after a while, you figure out that we all go through some crisis, some of us multiple times.
Right.
But we don't talk about those things. So we can feel like we're the only one.
Right.
What it has done for me in general is to give an appreciation for truly how resilient humans are.
Correct.
And I'm sure in your work you come across that. But I also, I just retired not too long ago from teaching college. So I'd have a lot of young people. A lot of them had already been through something like that. So, I'm not putting them down at all. But a lot of them hadn't. And so, I would say to them, if you have not experienced this yet, buckle up, buttercup, it's coming. I
Right.
don't want to scare them, but just to encourage them to reach out, take advantage of their communities. You can handle it. You think you can't, but you can. Now, is this overstating it? Because you work with resilience all the
And
time.
I definitely want to say, sometimes I feel two ways, like modern pop psychology as an example.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressure to seem okay and to manifest and almost create your own narrative. I do believe resilience definitely has a lot of choice in it because we know there are people who don't, who cannot withstand or choose not to withstand what life dishes out at them. I was looking at my students the other day and I was thinking, because some people well, a lot of us, adulting is far less fun than I think we sell small children on. And I think to myself, what could be different so that we don't have young people feel so betrayed that honestly, it's hard.
Yeah.
Life is hard and it's complicated and it's beautiful and it's awful. It's all of those things. But I do believe, and I think that's one of the reasons I love sharing people's stories of resilience. It is a choice. I don't know that everyone knows that. And I have worked with crime survivors, working in probation and in other venues, and child abuse victims. Not everyone, even not everyone in the same family, can move through something horrific
Yeah.
and do okay. And so you see very, 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 very different responses. Some of that depends on the level of resources and support. And I don't mean money, but
Mhm.
human support. It depends on so many different things. I don't want to suggest that everyone can make it through everything,
Well,
because
true. Yes.
they don't, and they don't always see. But sometimes when you point out, hey, you didn't get to choose what happened to you, but you do have options about how you get to respond and incorporate that circumstance into your life, it can be really life changing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that I love. I do love. And so, I always want to honor that people, not everyone does make it through devastatingly hard times. They don't.
True.
But if they knew that they weren't alone, does it make it easier? I always hope so. If they
Mm.
knew that some people didn't have the resources, formal resources in their communities to deal with what they're dealing with, but they created their own, um, sometimes that can be a helpful message, and that we can increase resilience.
Yes. Yes. You're helping me to refine my thinking about this. I'm wondering, it might be more accurate to say that let's see, how can I, on the fly here, phrase this more succinctly? It's not so much that you can handle anything that is thrown at you, but you will probably surprise yourself at what you
Yes,
can deal with. You are more
absolutely.
resilient than you think you are.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely. And it's exciting to see. And I feel like we have to celebrate that in people. But how we warn young people that life isn't all that easy, especially a generation, not everyone has this, but for those kids who came from families where they said, honey, you could do anything you want in the whole world. And sweetie, the world is your oyster, and isn't it going to be fun? And then you'll get married and it's going to be your prince or princess. And, I think sometimes those are the people who really feel like, wait, what?
Yeah, yeah. This
No
isn't
one
turning out
told
the
me.
way they told me it would. They lied to me. Yeah, it can certainly lead to a backlash.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, what is you've mentioned a couple of other books that you're working on. I don't know if you're ready to say much about them, but just for folks who want to become Lizbeth Meredith fans, we've got your
Oh,
website going down here, lameredith.com. And a quick side comment here: we are seeing more and more in the age of AI, which honestly I'm not worried about. I don't think you are either.
right.
More and more in the age of AI, it's what Joe Penn talks about, doubling down on being human. I
Right.
really think more and more that the writer is the brand, so to speak.
Right.
I'm mixing up questions here, but I'm going to circle around this. You have arguably written in three different genres right now.
Correct.
There's memoir, there's self-help, there's fiction. There's a theme through all of them of resilience, but I would argue that the core is really Lizbeth Meredith. There will be people who will read anything you write because they like your voice, they like your approach. So with that in mind, are you able to talk about what's coming up now? What's in the pipeline?
Absolutely, and happily so. And thank you for saying that. Yes, this is exactly what, if you go to a writer's conference, you're told not to do. Normally it's like, hey, pick a genre, stick with it. If you're a children's book writer, stick with that. If you're a memoir writer, stick with that, and so on. I don't mean to sound depressing, But I had thought when my book, the first one, became a TV movie, man, that's really going to help with sales. When I realized that the royalties from my first book, which I appreciate having written, and I'm so grateful for many readers, it does not feed even one of my cats annually. Not one. Then I said to myself, writing has to be a labor of love and do as you wish. And I said that recently in a college experience too at Western Kentucky University to screenwriters and creative writers. Do what feeds your soul and that you feel you could connect with people. It really doesn't, this choice, make promoting the books easier, but I'm really satisfied with it. And I'm feeding my cat, but that may be on the adjunct professor money that I make. So we're good. So that being said, I do want to enjoy this journey. I'm trying to organize the projects in my tiny little head in a way that one thing leads to another. When I wrote pieces of me, people said it.
And let me interrupt just a
Yes.
moment, because this may shape not only the conversation, but for people listening here. I have seen over and over that people who are in the creative fields don't do just one thing, and yet all of those pieces together,
Right.
very important.
Yeah.
So you may not make much off of one book. We've mentioned Joe Penn a few times here. I will say, ironically, I hear this advice over and over, and yet the writers that I know write whatever in whatever genre. Nobody seems to follow that advice, and I
Right.
think it's because of that idea of multiple streams of income. Now I know I'm interrupting you, but I thought I'd throw that in there in case that shapes what you're talking about, and for anybody listening.
Right.
You want to pay attention to whether your book makes money, but it's not going to make you a millionaire. I mean, even Stephen King doesn't depend on one book.
Correct.
And I have no idea with King. Obviously he's very successful as a writer, but I don't know what percentage of his income comes strictly from the books. He does lectures, he does workshops. So even somebody like him. Now, having thrown that in there and interrupted your train of thought, can you get back on it and continue with this?
Yes, absolutely. So the first book kind of led to the second, which was people would ask at events like, hey, what advice do you have? My kid is in a violent relationship, or my kids are overseas taken by, or, whatever. It was a lot about becoming one's own best advocate, because I don't have all the answers. And I don't believe any one therapist, any one law enforcement, nobody has all of the things, but learning to be our own best advocate as we swim through life, and try to keep our head above water, that is important. And so I could rely on the questions given to me, as well as my work experiences and the experiences of other people, again, not giving their names, this or that, to provide some help of one thing I've seen that helps increase resilience. When it came to Tilka, there is a foreshadowing of there's some travel there. Tilka decided to travel. This book, I have said, it's like Bridget Jones meets Elizabeth Gilbert. And at one point in the novel, Tilka is in a book group and they choose Eat, Pray, Love, which she rolls her eyes at and says, that's ridiculous. And no, I don't want to read this. It's so over commercialized. And then ends up really loving the book. Really, it resonated with her. In truth, I think solo travel especially, can be so empowering, and it really helped me. So I put that in the book with Tilka Faces the Odds, not all of the facts aligning with what happened in real life at all. But next, I'd like to do a solo women travel anthology for older women who've used travel past the age of 40, solo travel, as a way to increase resilience and help with healing and tell their stories. And then after that, my own travel memoir would come out. Not write neck and neck, because I'm a slow writer and I do many things. Like you said, I do public speaking because I'm a writer who has different streams of income. So I do sometimes professional public speaking, and I teach at a local college in Tennessee. And I'm not trying to make myself busy all the day, every moment of every day anymore. I'm trying to slow it down a little bit. and I do podcast, but it's really neat to think about this. So I've already started getting my um, call for entries ready for the springtime.
Hmm.
And so I will have something that people will be able to write in and say, hey, I've got a story here. Here it is in 1,200 words or less. Being in anthologies, I don't know if you've done that, Dawn. Have you been in anthologies?
I've had pieces in
Yes.
anthologies, and I'm actually thinking about putting an anthology together. I know
Let
they're
me
not money
know.
makers.
Yes, they're not. And so I'd like for this anthology, for me, I've been in several anthologies now. In fact, two this year. At the only one that ever paid, typically for listeners, a lot of times you're in it for free, or you don't get royalties. But again, with book royalties, you're not missing anything. Um, I will say Chicken Soup for the Soul I've been in, and they do pay, and they give you several copies. And I was in another one a Canadian company had called Goodbye for Now. Very recently, I loved their anthology, and it was stories of grief and loss.
Mm.
And I think for mine, I'd like for it to be a fundraiser for the YWCA. And so finding out ways to make sure that that can happen will be important, because it's more fun to promote something where you're not worried about yourself, but you do think to yourself, I was participating in this anthology. I'd like to sell at least 10 copies,
Mhm.
because a portion, that will go toward this charity that empowers women and children. So anyway, that's what I'm thinking. And, real life will shape what happens eventually, because it's hard to pick and be accepted that could be a fundraiser. And so that's next. Then my last my travel memoir will be on a single older woman who's not wealthy, very clumsy, and not adept, not a smooth traveler, but striking out and going to every continent eventually. So, that will be a ways out, because I've not gone to the final continent.
I was
So
going to say you have done, was it six
yes,
comments?
6 and number 7 a year from right now, if all goes well and I earn the money for it, I will be finding that 7th continent.
Mm.
So it's already tentatively booked, and, again, by myself, and hopefully I'll get a roommate, but it's okay. It's really okay that I think we're all in a period of self-discovery all our lives, but
Mm.
feeling like I could set this goal and I may not have made the timelines that I wanted, but that's okay. I still want to do it.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of life wisdom in that, and so there's that theme running through it all. There's the resilience, and in all of it, there's Lizbeth Meredith. So yeah, and I think this is encouragement for our listeners. The same thing is true for you, dear listener. There is a theme to your life. This is just occurring to me off the top of my head, Elizabeth. You may or may not remember years ago there was a book published called Life 101. Does it sound at all familiar to you?
Vaguely.
Yeah. It was, I think it was the 1970s or
Okay.
whatever. I'll put something in the show notes about it, because it's one of those books that went out of print and has come back into print.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, yeah. So there's some good insights there. And one of the things that has always stuck with me is people talk about goals and that sort of thing. They distinguish between mission and goal. And now this is my own take on it, folks. So this may or may not be what the authors would agree with. Okay, but from what I remember of that book, goals are set, missions are discovered.
Mhm.
Goals kind of look forward. Missions, you kind of have to. If you look at my life, it's like, okay, what's in common here? It looks like this guy couldn't hold a job, and yet there are things that they all have in common, And so,
Right.
well, that was the mission. Missions are things like my mission in life is to go west, and the goals there would be like, okay, the next goal is Nashville, and then Memphis, and then Little Rock, and Oklahoma City, and eventually you go all the way around the world, And okay, the mission continues, but now the goal becomes we're going to go up and go through Montana and Washington State and all that. one of the things that struck me from the book was they talked about a lot of rock stars and actors. You know, there's this myth of the 27-year-old with how many of them have sadly taken their lives
Right.
because they had life goals and they achieved those goals before they were 25. And it's like, well, what do I do now?
Right.
Okay, if you've lived your life based on goals, number one, you can get disappointed a lot.
Right.
And number two, if you achieve your goals, well, what do I do now? Well, if you figured out what your life mission is, then you never run out because mission never ends.
Right.
Now, again, this is a long way around going back to an older book, but it strikes me that what you're talking about right now kind of fits within that. I'm putting you on the spot, maybe, or you may have this all figured out, but do you have a sense at this point in your life what your life mission is, how all of these various things fit together?
I would not say have it all figured out. And I would say also that I am somebody who is very goal oriented. In fact, both my parents were high school dropouts, very bright people, didn't have the opportunity to go to school. And I've always wanted to do different so that I wouldn't be in that category because it's hard not to follow intergenerational patterns. And I really failed at some of that. But the problem with being goal oriented is exactly what you described. That if you reach a goal that, especially if it seemed really improbable or it took you years, it can be a dangerous thing to feel like that feeling of letdown, almost a buyer's remorse. And now what's the point? And so for me, when I finally started figuring out, and I'm still not good at it, like I have a YouTube channel, I've never worked on growing it very long. But I will say this, I can and have helped people understand trauma more and unpack some of it and increase resilience so that we can incorporate it into our lives. So not that we forget it or that we don't talk about it or we act like everything's fine, but I feel like for me, that is a strong sense of purpose for the work that I have done and all of the work that I have done. And yet I still remain very goal driven. And sometimes that's not the healthiest thing. It's just not. And sometimes it's okay to abandon a goal. Sometimes it wasn't meant to be. Sometimes it is simply the journey of what never happened that changed us. But I have definitely found myself as a person, especially someone who invested heavily in raising kids and then said, oh, wait, hate to say this, but I did finish in my 40s, when the kids were grown and think, okay, now life should be easier and I'll meet someone and won't it be great? Because this is my time, only to find it doesn't quite work like that all the time at all. So, I have found myself with very difficult, dark times, well past the crisis. And I think this is why this year I've said, I'm going to back away from being so hard and fast on goals. And it's great to have them if a person never has. Aspiring is a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
But also it's the journey and celebrating the effort and not the outcome that can keep us more content. I'm not a happy person all the time at all, but I'm pretty content and rarely sitting around saying, how come everyone else has it better than me? But those moments happen because I am human.
Indeed, indeed. Well, that sounds like a good note for us to wrap things up with. You do know, though, that I like to end an interview by saying, is there something that you wish that I had asked about that I didn't? And if so, what would your response to that be? Have we missed something?
I've loved our conversation and I'm so grateful to be back and to have this follow-up conversation. But really, no, I love that this was a conversation and it was delightful. I again, kind of like life's goals, I didn't feel pressured to be like, yay. So I think that's really important. You make me feel very comfortable and safe to talk about hard things. And so thank you, Dawn.
Well, thank you. I like to think that one of the attractions of the show is that we're, with all the guests, we're just having a conversation, and folks, you get to eavesdrop and even take part in it. We're recording this, but when it gets broadcast, you can make comments. It'll be on several channels. You can add to the conversation, so it is an ongoing one. Quick thing you mentioned, that you would be seeking input, or I forget how you put it, request for whatever, you're going to be looking for people's stories. Will they just go to lameredith.com to find that form when it's ready? I know it's not there right now.
Yes, that will be much the easier place, is to go on lameredith.com and read. I send out only like once a month. I'll be perfectly honest with you. And a newsletter twice a month is like breaking the record. And so, yes, that is the easiest place. I'm sure on social media, I will reach out as well, but it will be that call for entries for older women who've experienced solo travel and specifically increased their resilience. And it doesn't mean it was a perfect trip, or, oh, I saw this and I saw that, because it's not that. It's the personal journey, what makes it an interesting story, not that everything went perfectly or you went to some exotic location.
Okay, very good. All right, folks, I would encourage you to go to lameredith.com, get on the newsletter. But if you go and look later, because somebody, I don't know, 5 years from now may come across this episode. If there's a form there, then that's where you would find it. Everything goes around lameredith.com. So, Lizbeth, thank you once again for being a repeat guest, being back with us, updating us, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else comes from that mind of yours.
Thank you so much, Don. I really love being on the Alignment Show. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, folks. There we are with another episode. Glad we could get Lizbeth back on here with us. And who knows, maybe we can get her back on some other time. I did get an email from her. Looks like we've actually tried to get together in person a couple of times. We have a little writing group here in Blount County that we get together regularly. And looks like she's going to be able to join us maybe in April. I'm hoping so. In any case, a couple of things that really struck me and will stick with me out of this episode. A lot of things, really, but just right now, what I'm thinking about is that phrase that she threw off almost as just a throwaway phrase. There may not be a happily ever after, but there can be a happily enough ever after. I think that's really insightful. And of course, we talked a lot about resilience. I appreciate the refinement that Lizbeth gave me in thinking about that. It's not that you can handle whatever life throws at you, maybe. As she said, we said a couple of times, some people don't make it. And not digging too much into exactly what that means. It is sadly the case that some people don't make it, and we recognize that. But at the same time, I think for all of us, we can handle more than what we think we can. It's really important for people to know that they're not alone. We keep hearing about this epidemic of loneliness. And solitude is not the same thing as loneliness. We all need some solitude. In fact, solitude is hard to come by in today's culture. But you can be in a room full of people, feel alone, feel isolated. I'm seeking to do things that will increase the sense of community. I've got a couple of things coming up. I may put links about them in the show notes. Regardless, that's just really struck me. And then digging into what Lizbeth was talking about with her life mission, figuring out mission as opposed to goals. Not that goals are bad, but goals have meaning in the context of a life mission. I appreciate so much having had this follow-up conversation. Saw a quick pop up there from an old friend from the speaking community, Hillary Gooden. There's just connections all over the place. So as we get ready to wrap up, just a little reminder, be sure to check out the show notes at confidencecultivators.com, because there's going to be links there to the things that we talked about, books and other resources. Little reminder, if you enjoy the show, get value from it, you can always go to buymeacoffee.com/ Don King. That's Don with a double N. That's one way to support the show. You can make a one-time contribution or even sign up for ongoing. For that matter, an easy way to support the show is through Substack. That's the home of this podcast. And we have turned on paid subscribers. And so there's some extras there for folks who are joining us as a paid subscriber. Doesn't cost much. It's like getting a coffee. That's why that buy me a coffee thing kind of comes in. But be sure and subscribe. That is free. And for whatever it's worth, I work with a limited number of people to help them bring their books into publication. I don't do too many because I want to be sure that we do high quality for the folks that I work with. But if you're thinking about publishing a book, then that is something that you may want to connect with me about. In any case, speaking of books, if things go as planned, and we talk about that sometimes on this show, make your plans but hold them lightly. But if things go as planned, we're going to have another encore guest next week. He's actually been on here a couple of times, a member of that elite group that I call Stars in Alignment, folks who can come on the show at any time because they always have value for our listeners. Bob Berg is going to be back with us again. And so we're looking forward to that coming up next week. In any case, I hope that the show has brought you some value today, that it helps you to live your life so that I'm getting it backwards now. Live your values, live your values, and value your life. And it's that valuing your life thing that we always seek to support. We will see you next time on The Alignment Show. That's it for this week's episode of The Alignment Show. What has it inspired you to do in your own life? Whatever it is, take action now and take the first step. It will help you to talk with a friend about what you're thinking. Share confidencecultivators.com to spread the goodness. And remember to live your values and value your life. We will see you next week on The Alignment Show.